Today, without further ado, I'd like to present Leah Packard-Grams, who is in ancient history and Mediterranean archaeology. And she is speaking about her last summer's field season, the El Hibeh project. Her interests include Demotic Greek and Coptic papyrology and Greco-Roman Egypt, which is wonderful. I just went to Egypt for the first time, so I'm pretty excited to see what you have to show here. Everything's totally wonderful. The archaeology of papyrology and the physicality of ancient texts. I'm guessing you worked with Rita.
Yes. Yes.
Somehow it seems very linked.
Yep.
She's passionate about diversifying the fields of archaeology and Greco-Roman classics. So you're in the right place because ARF has been actively working on that in the last few years. And she's focusing on including accounts of people who've been historically oppressed and underrepresented in the past, which is also quite wonderful. She has translated, or is translating, I guess it should say, unpublished papyri in Coptic and Greek for Bryn Mawr College, and her recent work has been focused on lexicographical papyrology and the usage of lexical papyri. So you're going to tell us exactly what you mean by that when you start talking about that. I, a prehistorian.
Okay. You're a prehistorian, right?
So please, without further ado, please welcome. And those of you online, I don't know how you can do that, but try and shout out at home or clap for Leah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me this afternoon. I was really happy to step in to give this ARF Brown Bag Lunch talk today on one of my favorite topics, that is the site of El Hibeh. I'd like to thank the ARF staff, as always, for all their hard work, Sarah and Crystal and Nico and Christina especially. So the site of El Hibeh has been excavated by UC Berkeley since about 2001. And this was my first excavation season in Egypt, as opposed to a study season and backlog season, which made it especially exciting. El Hibeh is the modern name of the site, and it is located along the Nile on the east bank, where in this map you will see it identified as ancient Teo-Joy. It is probably not Teo-Joy, but this name has been repeated so often, and in many maps it is marked as such. The town was founded in the 21st dynasty of Egypt, which begins in 1077 BCE, and it continues all the way into late antiquity, and there are late antique papyri that attest to settlement in this area. In past seasons, the Berkeley team has even excavated some Christian mummies, but the site is quite sizable, measuring around 500 meters by a little less than 100 meters in an oval shape. This oval shape is the settlement Tell, surrounded by incredible mud brick walls that are over 17 meters high in the south. And I know they are 17 meters high because I took measurements of it this season. Outside the oval settlement are cemeteries to the north and east. The site is somewhat famous, if you can call it that, for being the site in which the tale of Wenamun papyrus was found, allegedly, which appears in many Egyptian literature books today in translation, as well as the petition of Pete-Ise, which is a petition that chronicles the history of an entire family who worked in the temple of Amun in El Hibeh from the 26th dynasty into the Persian period after Cambyses II conquered Egypt. It's an entire family history. It's absolutely incredible. My good friend is preparing a new book on this papyrus, and she's not affiliated with this excavation, but I thought I would take the opportunity to advertise her work here. It's a very rich site, and it has been excavated since 1900, and there is still so much to be explored. Our excavation lasted about 1 month, and we worked in 2 specific areas. Before I continue, it's important for me to note some disclaimers. As I stated before, this was my first Egyptian excavation, and I am not the authoritative expert on the site. That would be Director Carol Redmount. I also only worked in one of these 2 trenches, so this presentation will be primarily about the South Trench because it's what I can speak to best. Perhaps in the Q&A, we could open it up to other people who might know better, like Jason Silvestri. As I mentioned, the two trenches that were opened this season included one in the north and one in the south of the site. The southern trench was chosen because of its interesting formation, making a sort of bulge out from the city wall in a really interesting shape. Our director, Carol Redmount, wondered why the debris fell down the slope of the city wall in the way it did, which seemed to indicate a change in the wall construction at that section of the enclosure wall. She ended up being correct. Also, the wall had still not been well documented, except in a small test trench dug by an archaeologist named Wenke in 1980. So it has still not been well documented. In the north, a previous survey of ceramics in 2017 revealed almost exclusively third intermediate period ceramics coming from this area, which suggests an older settlement when the site was first founded. And for those of you who don't know, the third intermediate period in Egypt is lesser known, and future work will hopefully bring to light a myriad of discoveries. The northern site was also not damaged from looter pits. The site actually suffers from damage from looter pits over time, which is really unfortunate. So I thought I might bring you with me, dear audience, on a tour of the site. Each day began early with the sunrise outside the windows of the dig house before we crossed the Nile River. The microbus drives us from the dig house onto the ferry boat to take us to the opposite bank and up to the site. From the window of the microbus, banana groves and fields of animal fodder are visible against the backdrop of the limestone escarpment that characterizes this section of the Nile Valley. This escarpment is irregular and was chosen intentionally by ancient inhabitants of the area as a high place to construct a settlement. However, this limestone is very flaky and prone to erosion and slumping. When you arrive on site, the tell before you is broad and intimidating. The first thing you see is this: the north side of the settlement, including massive walls that extend all the way up to the top. So these, you can see my cursor here, these are all walls, and the settlement is up on top of this plateau here. The tell is above the Nile, and its true ancient name is something along the lines of Ta Dehenet Net Imun Aa Hemhmet, which means the crag of Amun, great of the war cries, or bleats, because he's a goat in this particular manifestation. The Greek name for the site, known from the Greek papyri uncovered by Grenfell and Hunt in 1901 to 1902, is Ankyropolis, city of the anchor. And it is known from a number of other textual sources, but it is not Taojoy or Tayujait, as previously thought. So it is here at the top of this tell, where those small human figures are, I have an arrow there, that the northern trench this season was located. This photo shows the North Trench and its features. It was excavated by Jessica Nitschke and Jason Silvestri and is at the very top of the enclosure wall. The mudbrick chambers were likely granary silos and storage structures alongside domestic spaces. These spaces were reused, and the team in the North Trench found 7 burials in these squares. The intrusive burials all dated to the 8th to 7th century BCE, based on ceramic finds, and in close temporal proximity to one another. 3 bodies were found in feature 1 on top of the silo's collapse. 2 were found in feature 2, and 2 others were buried just outside feature 1, and the other one is in another square outside of this photograph. The burial in square 2 actually may be slightly later in date than the others, but it showed remarkable preservation and dyed fabrics. Six of 7 of the bodies were female and 1 was male. They had ceramic grave goods, they were mummified, and the females were found with weaving tools and implements. The single male found in these squares died of tuberculosis or a respiratory illness. He had damage to the ribs and to his sternum. And he was under 30 years old when he died. His spine and knees showed signs of an extremely strenuous lifestyle, including running. We know all of this because of our 2 osteoarchaeologists, Zainab Hashesh and Jessica Kaiser. The females also all share genetic markers, which might suggest a family relationship. So as you walk further south on the Tell, the landscape is marked by occasional outcroppings of mud brick structures. The site is massive and there is still so much to be explored. Finally, as you reach the southern end of the Tell, you reach one of the points at which we took levels for the Southern Trench. This is my colleague and mentor, Jean Lee, taking levels one morning. You can see the meter stick in the background at the right, and the rest of the Tell extends north just to the left of that photo. So, well, the endorphins of getting the bubble just right are second to none. The archaeologists in the room will appreciate this. The southern area of the enclosure wall, where the slope ended abruptly, was the focus of our southern trench. It was intriguing and the main reason to excavate this area. So in the background of this photo to the right, you can see shrubs and halfa grass almost flush against the city wall. Whereas in the foreground, where our trench is, the slope was an entirely different shape. Digging on a slope was challenging since strata do not accumulate in the same way over time. And oftentimes gravity, like practically speaking, as you're excavating, gravity is not your friend. Essentially, we cut a trench straight through it as marked by these red lines. And what we found was quite interesting. The very top of the wall, as might be expected, had a number of bricks, but they were stamped with the names of the high priest of Amun and his wife, who were the de facto rulers of the south of Egypt in this time. But they had been rearranged, we found, in a couple places to make a makeshift hearth, wherein we found charcoal and bricks that had been taken out of their original courses of the wall to create a new hearth structure. Thus, the top of the wall at the north, the structures were reused for burials, as you'll recall. And here, some bricks were reused for production or cooking. In 1980, Wenke excavated 2 test trenches at Hibeh, and Wenke's test square 2 was placed in the South Tell, immediately adjacent to the wall, which is not far from where we were digging. There are similarities in the assemblage between the southern area wall trench and Wenke's test square 2. These included level 2 immediately under the surface, a feature that was a fire container of some kind, possibly a hearth, heat and reddened brick of which it was constructed, and there was a considerable amount of ash in and around this feature. So it's sort of interesting to compare with past test trenches with what we conducted this season. There was considerable ash in and around this feature, as I mentioned. While unlike our trench, Wenke's feature 1 was actually not cut into the enclosure wall. There may be some connections to the use of fire and installations along this section of the southern Tell and the city wall. So about these bricks. The bricks were stamped with the names of Isetemcheb and Menchepere, the high priest of Amun and his wife who controlled the area. Here's Jason Silvestri uncovering the first few courses. The top courses of the wall comprise remains of mud bricks, with several courses displaying bricks arranged in really interesting alternating orientations. It would be stamp facing up, followed by a thick layer of mud plaster, followed by another course with the stamp facing down, followed by a layer of bundled halfa grass matting. And you can see this red arrow on this particular slide as Jason is brushing off those bricks. You can see the halfa grass matting that separates and protects the two stamps from coming into contact with one another. So essentially, they were padding the names of the rulers with halfa grass, and halfa grass still grows to this day at the very bottom of the tell, as you can see in this red arrow. That is all halfa grass still growing there today. Excavating on a slope was a challenge for all involved. We learned a lot. This photo exemplifies the elation that some of us experienced at finding a new stratum of much finer soil between the two yellow lines there that matched with the opposite bulk. It didn't match up before we got to this layer. So this is all due to the practical difficulty of having a curved slope, not a simple slope down, an angle down. This diagram that I've sort of tried to put together to the left kind of shows the strange geometric shape that we were dealing with. It's rounded and it's also a slope. And it's kind of dome-shaped and irregular. And of course, our trench cut through it at an angle. It was really interesting stratigraphically. Good brain exercise. So the architectural elements we discovered underneath the end of this slope and right up against the city wall offered some answers as to why the slope against the wall ended here, which directly corresponded to our director, Professor Carol Redmount's original question of this strangely shaped formation. The answer to why it was shaped so strangely came with the revelation of a triangular structure built on an outcropping of limestone, which created a sort of high shelf. So here I've tried to sketch out the photo I took here. I am standing on the red X, looking forward, looking out towards the down slope. The city wall is to our back here. And you can see the limestone shelf and bedrock here. So the limestone outcropping actually ends. That's the light blue shape I have here. The limestone outcropping actually ends here, which kind of creates an abrupt drop off for the mound of earth that we found there. Curiously, the discovery of a small lower wall to the east seemed to mark the terminal edge of this limestone outcropping. But what about this triangular structure? Many ideas were floated. Maybe a glacis, which is a ledge before a citadel. That's a new vocab word for me, a glacis. It might have been a buttress to prevent slumping. Perhaps a ramp for donkey carts or other things. A pylon for a gate that was still buried outside the trench, sort of towards the bulk. It was a lot of brainstorming. This shows the structure in the process of being uncovered. You can see the southern bulk really well over there. And again, Ibrahim and Jean reading the bulk to look for clues as to its function. Ultimately, it ended up looking like this. As for the north bulk in the main section, a number of interesting finds appeared, from vertical pottery to ceramic slag. And we also found a dog mummy that was buried at the bottom of a pit. Which leads me to the topic of the beautiful ceramics that were found this season. Here, Ahmed and Ibrahim show us how it's done. But this is, of course, only after pottery washing. Here is Jean and I, and we're focused and hard at work, fueled by the thrill of discovery. Throughout the season, the southern trench that I worked on has consistently produced a number of the classic baking trays of the third intermediate period, which have a sort of carinated edges that produce a sort of chevron-shaped profile. Together with other pottery, Carroll is increasingly convinced that the pottery dates to the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, that is, the late Third Intermediate period, perhaps into the late period. And here I've just noticed I had to include this slide because there's a knot through a puncture mark in some sort of vessel that the knot is still intact. It's absolutely beautiful. Also of particular interest is that oasis wear consistently showed up in secure context. So oasis wear is characterized by the sort of color gradient that you can see at the breakages. And we found these in relatively secure contexts, including inside the wall of this triangular ramp, buttress, glacis, whatever we're calling it. Or perhaps we should just call it locus 9. And it was revealed when the outside course of bricks fell off. So this red arrow that I have here, I hope you're able to see this sort of dark shadowy area here. That's exactly where we were able to just kind of gently pull out these oasis wear chinking sherds. So the intact ceramics, the beautiful, beautiful intact ceramics were mostly found associated with the burials in the North Trench, which I will invite Jason to field questions at the end. They were sizable, complete, and they dated to the Third Intermediate period. As for the organic finds, I was astounded at the preservation of the woven mats and sandals. These are from the North Trench. As well as a pink leather shoe, which I hope you can see down there. The pink doesn't really show up in this lighting, but take my word for it, it's bright pink. In the Southern Trench, which was mostly midden in rubble and tumble, we did find a few woven fragments of basketry, one sandal at the very top of the wall that someone perhaps dropped while they were walking, but also a number of botanicals that matched with a previously illustrated study by an archaeobotanist working at the site in 1980. So some of these were really easy to identify. Others will remain for an archaeobotanist to study. So we found doom palm fruits. There's a sort of nut at the center of a doom palm fruit. Date pits, so many date pits. We found sycamore fig, which is related to the modern figs that we find today. Christ's thorn seeds, that's these small round pieces. They're very shiny, they're very glossy. In Arabic, they're called sidr. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I actually went to Cairo, and sidr is actually a hair mask treatment, which is sort of interesting. It's still used today, but it also has, these beautiful seeds also have medicinal properties, and they're actually mentioned in papyrus ebers. There were a number of wheat and barley species. That's this top row that I'm looking at here. Again, this is going to have to be for a proper archaeobotanist to analyze. I was unable, just through visual analysis, to be able to identify what species of barley, wheat, or emmer these were. But it is really important, actually, that we at some point do identify these, because in the Ptolemaic period, the Ptolemies, the Greek conquerors, actually introduced a new species of wheat. And it would be really interesting if we could identify the Ptolemaic wheat, the durum wheat, and if we had any. There were also balanites, which are at the lower right of this slide. They're sort of hollow on the inside. Some sort of basil species, which you can see me holding before we put it into a bag to be cataloged. These sort of flower structures that sort of come up. This is what happens if you're a gardener, you know. If you let your basil go to flower, that's exactly what they look like. And also an incredible find was essentially a bale of hay, which was bundled straw and fodder that was actually still tied in a bow with an ancient knot, which I just found absolutely magical. So As for the small finds, we had many from both trenches, but these will be, alas, overwhelmingly from the southern trench. This latest datable finds, the latest datable finds include this amphora spike, which was admittedly a surface find, but it was just outside our trench. And from inside the trench, my colleague Ibrahim found this coin of Valentinian. Another late surface find by the amphora spike was the nozzle to a frog lamp, complete with burn marks. These frog lamps usually date to the 3rd or 4th century CE, but there are, of course, exceptions extending forwards and backwards in time. These objects are understudied, and my colleague Clara Wright is currently preparing a publication about their importance in the archaeological record, so stay tuned for that. Small combs appeared, as did plenty of faience, which is a ceramic paste, and when fired, it turns this beautiful blue glazed color. To the left, at the bottom of locus 28, was a faience scarab beetle. And while there's no name, usually we might expect the name of a pharaoh on a scarab beetle, there's actually an inscribed title, which Jean Lee translated on the spot. And it says, Weret Hasut, which means the great one of the foreign lands. However, Jason Silvestri has suggested that the T beneath the bird actually belongs with Hasut as a phonetic complement rather than the where. So is it where Hasut or Weret Hasut? Provided that we can find more information on the temporal usage of this particular title, we could potentially date the building of the triangular buttress, since locus 28 is part of the fill that was leveled before construction of the buttress. So essentially, this is from a layer below the buttress. Amongst the most interesting is the finding of a small faience head surmounted with a scarab beetle. He's wearing a little scarab beetle on his head from locus 3. This is clearly a broken Pataikos amulet, as the back of the head is pierced to facilitate a string for wearing around the neck. Additionally, a mold for producing a Pataikos figurine was found by chance against the south bulk of our southern trench, alongside some cloth. The frequency with which Pataikos appears both actually in the northern trench and in the southern trench of this season is quite interesting. So Pataikos is a god that is known all the way from the Old Kingdom onward and appears to be identified with either Ptah or Ptah Sokar, as well as Horus the child, Horus Packard. The protective god depicted on these amulets could then warn off malevolent forces. So I would next like to tell you about my experience with locus 25, the locus that kept on giving. It was opened on December 7th, and we immediately knew something special was occurring when we began to see this. So looking down at the bottom of the trench, we saw flat-lying pottery, chaff, including that beautiful piece of bundled hay, leather, the black arrow up in the upper right-hand corner is pointing to a sort of dusty folded piece of leather, a rope handle for a ceramic jug, which I'll show in just a moment, faience beads. The two light blue arrows there are pointing to these ceramic beads in situ. And of course, we found papyrus. So, small cornflake papyrus fragments were discovered in 2 loci in the Saw trenches. Saw A, locus 25, on the 8th and 9th of December, 11 fragments, and Saw C, locus 3, on the 11th of December, we found 2 fragments. We designated these Papyrus Hibeh Berkeley 1 through 11 and 12 to 13 respectively. It was really, really surprising to a lot of us that we found papyrus fragments not only in this tumbled midden, but also on the very top of the wall. So these fragments have little philological use, but are of great value because they inform our understanding of the wall's stratigraphy and dating, the language use on them, the papyrus quality and manufacture, of which there are a number of new studies that I'm really excited to talk about maybe later, and the preservation conditions of the papyri at the site of El Hibeh, which Grenfell and Hunt did not record when they excavated in 1901. So more papyrus fragments followed from locus 25 to the west and north of the original find, and these written with a wider writing instrument. One of the papyri had charcoal adhered to the bottom of it, and the question was raised as to whether these were burned. Is this a burn pit? However, the fragments showed no evidence of charring on the edges, and neither did the pottery. So it is therefore likely that the papyrus was deposited when the charcoal and burnt wood was already cold, which again supports this midden context. The matrix of locus 25 contained lots of chaff and straw and grass, which is visible in the north bulk post-excavation. The conditions of deposition remain unknown, but this allowed for this largely organic matrix to survive with remarkable presentation, called afsh in Arabic. That's what this particular chaffy sort of organic lightweight layer is called. It's afsh. So when excavation continued on December 9th, it became difficult to distinguish the end of locus 25 since the chaff became more and more scarce. However, the discovery of papyrus Hibeh Berkeley 10 and 11 confirmed the deposition stratum was the same, and we were able to continue with this locus in the field with confidence. So actually, in this way, the papyri helped to distinguish the layer. Here's some more cornflakes. And it turns out that Wenke's test trench also uncovered these papyrus cornflakes in 1980, also against the city wall, and a future comparison of these would be useful. Here, perhaps at the end, if we have time, I do have a video to show of the papyri actually coming out of the matrix. So why don't we save that for the Q&A? Someone perhaps ask that during the Q&A. So to conclude, I wanted to mention that we are not the only ones on site this season. You'll see here a Sahara sand viper, a cattle egret, donkey rides were provided, the tell dogs, including this puppy Penugem, a kingfisher there. And this bird, this beautiful, beautiful bird is called a green bee eater. I cannot take credit for this photograph. I did not photograph any green bee eaters. Jessica Nitschke, my colleague Jessica Nitschke, photographed this green bee eater. Also not my photo because the greater Egyptian jerboa was proved too elusive to capture on film, unfortunately. So that's a stock photo. Of course, Khepri, the god, the scarab beetle god, I had a close encounter with one morning. And immediately after this photo was taken, you'll notice how my sleeve is sort of hanging open. Yeah, that I immediately had to shake him off, unfortunately. So it is hoped that in a future season, we will be able to expand both probe trenches to large exposures in both the north and south of the site. Expansion could hopefully reveal whether there is a gate, if this is a pylon, or simply clarify the need for a sloped wall that we discovered. And also while tracing other walls, such as that lower east wall that we found, which may refine our understanding of the eastern city and its relationship to the structures to the west, as well as the presence of fired bricks at the top of the tell. Now, while these are just preliminary results, further results are going to be presented by Jason Silvestri at the RC annual meeting, which is actually going to be held in San Francisco. That's the American Research Center in Egypt. We are also working on a project website, which is almost ready to go. And of course, as always, studying what we've already excavated, making connections, putting things together, and perhaps opening up further areas. Thank you so much for your attention. Does someone maybe want to ask me to play that video? Okay. Let's see. Let's do that. Moment. I'll turn. You don't need the volume. It's just me going, oh my gosh, papyrus. There we go. I'm handing it to Jean. So the man next to me is my colleague and mentor, Hajjaj. And here he is. If I had the embarrassing audio on, you would see that he is coaching me on how to extract the papyrus from the matrix using dental tools. This is, again, this very light sort of, I'd almost describe it as fluffy ash flare, locus 25, the locus that keeps on giving. So he's coaching me on how I should be removing and treating this sort of soil. Ta-da! And it's off. And here I am sort of gently picking at a piece of charcoal that is immediately underneath it. And here in the embarrassing audio, which I will not share with you, Jean Lee suggests that we actually keep that piece of charcoal if we wanted to perhaps carbon date it. So it's folded and you can see different ink marks, but of course any conservation or gentle brushing and shaking off of that loose dirt should be done off-site. I am very happy. That's that. Already a question, great.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's very provocative. I mean, wonderful to see excavations and your progress. I wanted, since you're all working on sites, you know what it's like. You're just thinking about everything all the time. So yeah. What is the team or your thoughts on what these, why, and Winky's too, why these fragments are buried in this ridden area? I mean, do you think that they obviously were broken up before they got there? From the way you're talking about it, I could have misinterpreted it, that they were fragments that ended up being thrown away, or were they offerings? I mean, what is your, I mean, you're not publishing it, so you're among friends. What's your, what do you think they're for?
What do I think?
Why did they end up in that place where they were?
End up in that place? My bet is, thank you for your question. I appreciate it. Yes, and as you said, among friends, it's my inclination that this slope, albeit as I hope to have shown, a very strangely shaped dome slope going down from the wall. I believe it's a midden context, and it's all tumbled. So my inclination is to say that any discarded papyri, and there were actually a few fragments that were written on both sides, which shows that they're wanting to recycle papyrus, use every possible space of papyrus. But then perhaps when you inherit your hypothetical ancient Egyptian grandfather's papyri, and you read through them and you go, oh, this has to do with some land dispute that happened a century ago. I'll just put it inside of this jar alongside the burned charcoal that's taking up space in my hearth, and then chuck it over the wall.
Do you think it's just rubbish that was thrown out?
Yes, and this is not uncommon at other sites such as Oxyrhynchus and Tebtunis, and I did get a chance to visit Tebtunis on this particular trip to Egypt. Yes, and that is not uncommon, and there are strong parallels for papyri being thrown away in trash middens, often, as I said, written on both sides.
Thank you so much for your talk. That was really fascinating and really great to see such comprehensive results from a single site. And I also have a question about the papyri fragments. It seems
You're making my day. You have no idea. You're making my day.
It seems that lots of them were recovered at this site and that lots of them are commonly recovered at sites. What does the conservation process look like from here? And also, are there experts who are able to, I imagine there are people who are able to translate the fragmentary papyri. Is it particularly useful? Is information come out of them that is useful, or is it too fragmentary to be of any use? What context, if you can get information from these fragmentary papyri, what context or information about the sites or people's lifeways can you get?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So sorry, you wanted to know contents of the papyri and conservation. Yes? Okay. So in terms of conservation, as I showed from that video, you just take it out as gently as possible. Feel the matrix, feel the soil, and determine the margins. Determine the margins of the papyrus. It's also, when you're excavating it, it's important to note that sometimes papyri can be folded sort of at a right angle. So if you are excavating down and you see a flat-lying papyrus, you want to make sure that it's not bent in through something you can't see. I don't know if I'm explaining that well. You want to make sure that you definitely find the margins and dig around it. Then, as you saw, putting it into a small container, and then it is taken to the caravans for photography and processing. In the caravans, gently picking off dirt using actually a camera blower to gently remove the dust and dirt from it. And proper conservation, there are, I know I have two very good friends who are proper like papyrological conservators. Papyrus is a very strong material. It's strong and it does well in terms of conservation when you actually intentionally humidify it, right? Because the preservation, well, I've gone all on and on about how amazing this preservation is at the site. Well, it's because it's so dry. But if you actually cover papyrus with a small dish of water, you have the flat-lying papyrus, and then you cover it with sort of a bin, a clear plastic bin. Just that humid environment can make it so that you can actually unfold it, and it actually, the plant fibers remain intact because they can still constitute this sort of water and this rehumidification. So in terms of conservation, that is something that happens to unfold it. And in terms of the contents, a few of them were blank. One of them, all that was left was a Greek delta. Interesting. And then there were two further hieratic fragments that were interesting. Of these, I would say it's important to note, right, that Greek delta, well, what is it? We don't know, but it attests to the presence of Greek, the ability of ancient inhabitants to write Greek, the ability of ancient inhabitants to write hieratic, and maybe in future seasons we'll find more. And also in terms of the translations, there is one hieratic fragment that I have high hopes for. I haven't had a chance to really sit down and study it yet, but of course we've processed it, brushed it off very cleanly using that photo duster. And I look forward to having an even better answer for you in the future.
We do have one question in the chat.
In the chat? Okay. Clara says, thank you so much for this wonderful report from the field. What a wonderful site. Quick question, is cornflake papyrus a technical term or a newly coined and apt description? Well, Clara, I will say I did not get this. I did not coin this phrase myself. It came from Kim Ryholt, who is a papyrologist in Copenhagen. He also studies Tebtunis, and it is an actual term that many papyrologists use. Actually, it's not just me, I swear. Some of my fellow excavators kind of looked at me like I was crazy. No. Oh, cornflake papyrus. Papyrus that is so fragmentary that it appears when it comes out and is all collected into a box as a box of cornflakes.
Small fragments.
Super small fragments. Yes, the size of a small coin. Yeah. No, it wasn't your hearing. No, it's actually what papyrologists call it. We're a very friendly bunch, papyrologists. We're a friendly bunch.
Well, we're on the topic of minutia. I'm just curious, as you're thinking about people who would have been handling this before they were presumably tossed, is the papyrus ripped, cut? How do they wind up in these small fragments?
That is a great question. Are they, so I think I'm going to answer with three possibilities. That they are intentionally cut using a copper papyrus knife. There are burial assemblages of scribal tools, pens, inks, inkwells, palettes, also including this very characteristic copper blade. It's a very thin blade, about this big, and from these assemblages, this copper papyrus blade can actually help slice off smaller fragments of papyrus. If you need to write a short letter to your friend in a neighboring village, you could take this papyrus knife. So that's one of the reasons. There's also a book called it's an article. It's called Biblical Scriptures as Trash or something of the sort. Seriously, it is by Anne-Marie Lyondike, and she writes an entire section about how she believes, based on the fraying of the papyri, that actually when biblical scriptures of the New Testament were tossed away in the midden at the site of Oxyrhynchus, which is not too far from El Hibeh, by the way, that they were intentionally ripped. And she can tell this based on putting the fragments of the ripped pages back together. And she can tell that they were ripped in a regular fashion. Really fascinating. And the final thing I will say is perhaps they were tossed in as a complete sheet. And you know, we do have remarkable preservation here at the site, but time eats away at it. And worms, bookworms. Bookworms existed. Bookworms existed in antiquity and absolutely drilled little bookworm holes through scrolls of papyrus. And they create this very regular pattern as you unroll a papyrus scroll, if you have a lengthy one, and it creates a little polka dot pattern.
Another comment in the chat.
Another comment in the chat. I can't is it down here? Where did I put the chat? Maybe I'll stop share. Here we go. There we go. Another comment in the chat. Thank you. Julia Trochet, Dr. Julia Trochet says, fantastic talk. Thank you. If you have time, I'd love to hear about the amulet associated with Ta. Yes, it's Patykos. And apologies for moving you away from the papyri. Yeah, thank you. No, we have to. We do what we must. So Patykos is this god known from the Old Kingdom, which I'm sure you have a particular interest in. His name is Patykos, and he's associated with Horus the child. So Horus, as a small child, he has a lock of hair, and also Ptah. And we also did a field trip to the new Grand Egyptian Museum. Were you able to go to the Grand? Yes, that's wonderful. Among all of the many faience amulets that they have on display there, actually this was one of our Fridays. Fridays are off in Egypt. And one of our days off, we were examining these little faience amulets, and we found, oh my gosh, this is absolutely it. It's a small sort of squat figure that is a child, has a protruding belly and a scarab on the head, and it was labeled a faience amulet of Pataikos. And of course, further research online and in the library confirmed this. So I'm afraid that's all I can tell you, but we should definitely explore the implications of Pataikos further. It would be a good mascot for the project. Jason. Oh, no.
I'm so sorry to ask another question, and I raised my hand before you said that's all I have. But I had a question about the Pataikos figurine as well, and specifically the scarab on the head. It reminds me quite a bit of, in Jordanian context, we found quite a few Harpocrates figurines, which is the Hellenized version of Horus, child Horus, which was associated with originally pharaonic rebirth, and then eventually with sort of reincarnation as a more generalized sense, and more people were able to access it. But we always had in Harpocrates figurines that we would find the ear curl and the finger put to the mouth, but I've never seen a scarab. Do you know what the scarab means, what it represents, and why it would be on the head?
I'm afraid I don't. Perhaps in association with the god Khepri. If Jason wants to jump in, if he knows a bit more, go ahead.
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, it's usually a rebirth symbol, but I don't know if there's been a study of Pataikos's iconography that's recent. There's some old ones that we looked up when we were getting a lot of amulets in the other trench as well. But I don't think anyone's done like an updated, I don't know, maybe Julia knows. Not to play.
If you can hear me, you can wait for my forthcoming book potentially. But otherwise I don't have a great answer.
Okay, well, forthcoming book by Julia Trochet. Yeah, fantastic. It's so cool that you were able to find that connection between your Jordanian contexts of Harpocrates. Yeah, there's something, right, there's something going on here for sure. And it'll take an intrepid scholar to tackle it for sure.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful questions and engaging discussion. I really appreciate it.